stay in this area because the Crown Office is being urged to get creative to tackle the backlog of thousands of cases in Scotland's criminal courts. Earlier this year, it emerged that waiting times for the most serious cases to come to trial had doubled. Well, now leading defence lawyer Thomas Ross KC is warning prisoners being held on remand could turn to the courts and launch legal action against the Scottish Government for breaches of their human rights. Well, Thomas Ross KC is with us now. Good morning to you.
Good morning, Gary.
What's your sense of just how serious this backlog is in the criminal courts?
Well, I mean, it's extremely serious because everybody who is working in the criminal justice system, prosecutors, clerks, judges, defence counsel, absolutely everybody is working flat out. And in the High Court in particular, they've really exhausted all the court resources which they have. And with all that effort, the delays are still going up. So really there needs to be some creative thinking about it.
And what is at the root of all of this? Is it the COVID pandemic?
I think there's a variety of causes. That's by far the main cause. I mean, we had a period of a couple of months where no cases were done at all. And then we had another few months where there was only a handful of cases going through the courts. So inevitably that would create a backlog. But there have been some other systematic difficulties arising from some very, very large-scale prosecutions for serious organised crime, for example, trials which take 6, 7, 8 weeks. There is quite a proliferation of those type of cases at the moment. And
we're seeing an increase, quite a significant increase in the use of remand, particularly for women prisoners. Are you concerned about that?
Extremely concerned. I mean, I think at the start of the pandemic, the remand numbers in Scotland were round about 900. They're now, the last time I checked, 2,200. So we're just putting more people into the prison system, and it's taking longer for people to come out the other end because of the delays in the system. So at every level, there are serious problems, and I think there has to be some creative thinking to improve things.
Well, I'll ask you what creative thinking you're suggesting in just a second, but just on that remand issue, there have been suggestions that some of those held on remand for long periods of time might actually be tempted to plead guilty to crimes they didn't commit, because ultimately they'd spend less time in jail. If they plead guilty, they could be out because of the time served, as opposed to having to wait potentially months for a trial.
I've no doubt that's already happened, Gary. It won't happen in the High Court where the sentences are likely to be somewhere between 6 and 12 years. But in the Sheriff Court, where the sentence might be 2 years, where you would be released after a year, obviously once you've been in remand for more than a year, it doesn't make any sense to stay in prison. So quite a lot of people will simply just go and plead guilty so they get out immediately.
So what sort of creative thinking would you urge the Crown Office to look at?
Well, I mean, I think there probably has to be more active plea negotiation. I can understand why the Crown would refuse to take pleas in normal circumstances. I just think maybe they have to be a wee bit more flexible. If we're in an emergency, and I don't think we're very far away from an emergency when we have 2,200 people in remand and they're having to wait maybe 2 years for a trial. I mean, that's as close to an emergency as I think I've seen in my legal career. So, any form of creative thinking. I mean, one of the things we suggested early on was that perhaps they could look at giving a greater discount for people who pled guilty, which would get cases out of the system. I mean, it's still the same discount as it was before COVID was thought of. And although it might stick in some people's throats to give people who are, for example, convicted of drug offences a 50% discount, it would get a lot of cases out of the system, so it would be one solution to it.
Well, one of the other suggestions that you've made is setting up drugs courts with the power to hand down sentences of up to 5 years. But that would still need administered, wouldn't it? So how would that solve this particular problem?
Well, what I thought is they just had a court, and anybody who offered to plead guilty to any drug trafficking offence would go to that court, and the maximum would be 5 years or 6 years or 7 years. It would introduce a degree of certainty, and I think it would be attractive to some people because, unlike the American system, we can only ever give an accused person an estimate of the sentence that he or she is likely to face. And obviously, if there was a lid on it, then some people might think, well, that doesn't sound bad. I mean, these are solutions that wouldn't find favour with everybody who, probably quite a lot of people out there want more lengthy sentences. But we're in a very, very difficult situation, and I just think there needs to be some, blue sky thinking to get us out of it.
And I mentioned at the beginning the suggestion of prisoners held on remand bringing civil cases against the Scottish Government for a breach of their human rights. How likely do you think that might be, and would they have, how good a case would they have?
Everybody has a right to a trial within a reasonable time, and I think it's arguable that if you're lying on remand for a period in excess of 2 years, then you're not getting a trial within a reasonable time, and that arguably is a breach of human rights. There's a number of other factors, because if people are ultimately convicted, the sentence will be backdated to reflect the fact that they were in custody. In other words, most of the people who are on remand are serving sentences which will be imposed in the future. But I was really thinking of people who are acquitted, so if you lie in remand for 2 years and you're then acquitted of the offence, as things stand, you're not entitled to any compensation for that state of affairs. And remember, Gary, it was recently established in an Irish court that an accused would not be extradited to Scotland because the prison conditions in Scotland were so terrible. People were being held in custody, held in their cells for up to 22, 23 hours a day. So imagine being locked up in a cell for 23 hours a day for 2 years and then been found not guilty or not proven. It wouldn't surprise me if in that situation a person was to raise an action based on a breach of the right to a fair trial within a reasonable time.
We're grateful for your time on the programme this morning. Thanks for speaking to us. That's defence lawyer Thomas Ross, KC.
It's just coming up to 7:50. Let's have